There are places in this world where the air feels heavy, where the whispers travel on the wind, and the shadows seem to watch you. Some stories are forgotten, others refuse to die. This is one of those stories. It begins in 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. 9 hikers, experienced, strong, and fearless, set off on an expedition into the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. They never returned. When search teams found their bodies weeks later, the scene was horrific. Their tent was ripped open from the inside, as if they had fled in terror. Their footprints leading away into the endless white snow, barefoot, half-dressed, exposed to the -30 cold. Some were found miles apart, their bodies frozen in twisted, unnatural positions. Others mutilated with no rational explanation. Was it a freak accident? A military experiment gone wrong? Or something not of this world? Tonight we unravel the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The facts, the theories, and the terrifying truth that still lingers on that mountainside. Welcome to the Sinister podcast. To understand what happened, we have to start at the beginning. Because it wasn't just any group of hikers. They were some of the best, and yet, even they couldn't survive what was waiting for them. To understand what happened, we have to start at the beginning. Because this wasn't just any group of hikers. They were some of the best, and yet, even they couldn't survive what was waiting for them. January 23rd, 1959, the city of Sverdlovsk, Soviet Russia. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineer student at Ural Polytechnic Institute, is assembling his team. This isn't a simple trip. It's a Category 3 expedition, the highest level of difficulty, harsh terrain, sub-zero temperatures, a test of survival. But Dyatlov, he was ready. He had handpicked his team, selecting some of the most skilled hikers and mountaineers he knew. Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, the leader, meticulous, intelligent, respected. He planned everything down to the smallest detail. Zinaida Kolmogorov, 22 years old, independent, fearless. She had survived brutal conditions before, but this time was different. Yuri Doroshenko, 21 years old, the guy who once faced down a bear and scared it away. If he was afraid of something in the mountains, what was it? Ludmila Dubina, 20 years old, tough, determined. Her body would later be found with injuries so horrifying even coroners couldn't explain them. Rustem Sublodin, 23. Alexander Kolnetlov, 24. Nikolai Brignol, 23. Simon Zolotegrov, 38. And Yuri Krishnashenkov, 24. Experienced, skilled, confident. None of them were the type to panic. And then there was the 10th hiker. When the group set out, there weren't 9, there were 10. Yuri Yudin, the last-minute addition to the team, but fate had different plans for him. As they hiked deeper into the Ural Mountains, Yudin's body began to fail him. Chronic pain in his joints, an old condition flaring up. It got worse. Eventually, he had no choice but to turn back. He said his goodbyes, hugged his friends, watched them disappear into the snowy wilderness. He had no idea that he was saying goodbye forever. For days, they hiked through the endless white wilderness, snow stretching in every direction, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. But they were strong. They laughed, they took pictures, documented everything. Their final photos show nothing out of the ordinary. Just a group of friends pushing back the cold, preparing for their toughest climb yet. Smiling. Tired, but happy. Not knowing that these pictures would become evidence in one of the most chilling unsolved cases in history. Then came February 1st, the decision that sealed their fate. Their goal was Ottorten, a remote peak deep in the Ural range. But a snowstorm rolled in, visibility dropped, they veered slightly off course, and instead of stopping near the tree line, where they'd have shelter, they made camp on an exposed mountainside. Why? Why would experienced hikers set up camp in the worst possible spot? Some believe they did it on purpose, a survival test, a way to push themselves to the limit. Others believe something led them there. That night, something happened. Something so terrifying, so unimaginable, that they ripped open their tent and ran out into the night, without their shoes. February 12th, 1959. The hikers were supposed to return. Families waited, friends checked their watches. The days stretched on. Nothing. At first, no one panicked. Delays were common on difficult expeditions. Maybe they were waiting out the bad weather. Maybe they had taken a longer route back. But as the silence dragged on, unease crept in. Then, fear. On February 20th, a rescue operation was launched. First, it was volunteers, students, fellow hikers, people who knew Dyatlov and his team. But soon, the Soviet military stepped in. Something wasn't right. Planes scanned the landscape from above. No sign of movement. Search teams on skis pushed through the deep snow, calling out names that would never answer. It took days. Then, they found it. At first glance, it looked almost normal. The tent was still partially standing, snow piled around it, frozen in time. But as the search team approached, something was wrong. The tent wasn't buried under an avalanche. It hadn't collapsed from strong winds. No, the fabric had been slashed open from the inside. Who or what was inside that tent that made 9 experienced hikers rip their way out in terror? Why did they flee the snow? Barefoot. Inside the tent, everything was still there. Their boots, their coats, their food. Even their skis were propped up neatly, like they had intended to return. But they didn't. They ran. The footprints told the story. They led away from the tent, leading downhill towards the tree line. Some were barefoot, some wore only socks. The prints were orderly. No signs of struggle, no frantic running at first. But what were they walking toward? Or what were they running from? The rescuers followed the footprints, and that's when they found the first bodies. At the edge of the tree line, laying in the snow beneath a large cedar tree, were the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Their bodies were half-dressed, no shoes, no coat, their hands torn apart. The branches above them snapped, broken as if someone had climbed desperately, crawling their way upward. Were they trying to escape something? Nearby there was an evidence of a fire. It had burnt for a short time before going out. Were they trying to stay warm, or were they trying to keep something away? Then, the search team spotted 3 more bodies, scattered along the path between the tent and the tree line. The rescuers moved slowly, counting their steps, pushing through knee-deep snow, and then they saw them. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, found lying on his back, his hands clenched tight onto his chest, as if gripping something invisible. Zinaida Kolmogorov, her face twisted in terror, like she had seen something impossible. And Rustem Solbadin, his skull fractured. But here's the disturbing part. No external wound, like something had crushed him from the inside. It was clear now, something had forced them to flee. What? And where were the last 4 hikers? It took 2 months to find the rest, and when they did, the case turned from bizarre to horrifying. May 1959. As the snow began to melt, the final 4 bodies were found, buried deep in a ravine. They had been hidden under the snow, and their injuries impossible. One of them, Nikolai, had his skull completely crushed, like something had slammed his head with incredible force. Another, Alexander Kolvetov, had no visible wounds, but his neck was twisted in an unnatural way. And then there was Ludmila. Her ribs were shattered, as if she was hit by a car, but there was no bruising, no external impact wounds, like something had crushed her from the inside. And the most terrifying part, her tongue and both her eyes were missing. Not eaten by animals, not decomposed, gone, removed. Then came the final pieces of evidence. Traces of radiation on their clothes. The Soviet authorities closed the case quickly. Too quickly. No further investigations, no official cause of death beyond this vague, unsettling phrase, unknown compelling force. But what really happened? That's where the theories begin. We have the facts, the bodies, the crushed bones, and the missing eyes and tongue. The footprints leading into the snow. The tent slashed open from the inside. But we have no answers, only theories. Some rational, some horrifying. But none of them explain everything. The official Soviet explanation, an avalanche. The hikers heard a rumbling in the night, panicked, cut their way out of the tent, ran downhill, and froze to death. But there's just one problem. It doesn't make sense. First, there was no sign of an avalanche. The tent was still partially standing. The snow around it was undisturbed. If an avalanche had buried them, there would have been debris, scattered supplies, displaced snow. But the campsite looked untouched. Second, why would experienced hikers, people who had survived extreme conditions before, flee, half-dressed, into the deadly cold, instead of grabbing their gear? And then there's the injuries. A typical avalanche would cause external wounds, bruising, cuts, impact injuries. But these hikers, their bones were crushed internally, with no external signs of trauma, like something had hit them from the inside. So if it wasn't an avalanche, what else could it have been? Some believe the hikers weren't alone that night. They saw something they weren't meant to see, and they paid the price for it. The Soviet Union was in deep Cold War military testing at the time. Secret weapons, nuclear experiments, experimental sound frequencies. The Ural Mountains, a perfect place to conduct them, away from prying eyes. So what if the hikers stumbled into a classified experiment? What if they witnessed something they weren't supposed to? Let's look at the evidence. Traces of radiation were found on their clothing. Radiation. That's not something you just find in the snow, unless something's radioactive was there. And then there were strange orange lights in the sky that night, reported by other hikers and locals miles away. Was it a missile test? A failed experiment? A secret Soviet aircraft? Maybe something went wrong. Maybe the hikers were accidentally exposed to something dangerous, forcing them to flee the snow without knowing what they were doing. Or maybe they were silenced. The Soviet government closed the case fast. Too fast. They didn't allow further investigations. Some say the bodies were tampered with before handing them back to the families. The official cause of death, unknown. Compelling force. What does that even mean? But if it wasn't the government, then what else could have driven the hikers into the night? This is where we leave science and step into the unknown. Because some believe it wasn't man-made weapons that forced the hikers out of their tent, that it wasn't a natural disaster or even a human attack. Some believe it was something not human at all. Let's start with the lights in the sky. The strange orange orbs spotted in the region that same night. Some dismiss them as military flares, others swear they were something else. UFO sightings weren't uncommon in Soviet Russia, and the government, they didn't dismiss them. They had classified files that wouldn't be declassified until decades later, documents that suggest encounters with things beyond human understanding. What if the hikers weren't alone? Then there's the Manzai people, the indigenous tribe who lived in the region. To them, these mountains were sacred. They spoke of spirits that walked in the wind, forces that should not be disturbed. What if the hikers did something they shouldn't have? What if they woke something up? Some paranormal researchers have suggested infrasound, a low-frequency vibration caused by the wind whipping through the mountains. It can cause hallucinations, paranoia, even extreme panic. Could the hikers have been driven into a state of terror, fleeing from something that only their minds could see? The fact is, we will never know. So, what do you think happened at Dyatlov Pass? Was it just a tragic accident? A freak weather event? Or did they stumble upon something they were never meant to see? Maybe the real horror is that we'll never know. That whatever happened on that mountainside died with them. Let me know your thoughts and tell me your theory. And if you enjoyed this episode, follow the Sinister podcast for more mysteries, more horrors, and more questions that refuse to stay buried.